Good morning, everybody. I'm Jeff Stutzman, the Chief Intelligence Officer for Red Sky Alliance, and this is the weekly threat brief. We're going to do this a little bit differently. This is a slightly different format, and I appreciate some feedback. Next slide. We're going to start out on a bit of more of a strategic posturing. On January 1st of this year, we issued a report on China's vision of cyber sovereignty. What exactly is cyber sovereignty? Sovereignty in and of itself is the ability for a nation to be able to control its borders, to raise taxes, to be able to have a military to defend itself, and to operate as an independent entity. China believes and has been vigorously defending their ability to extend that viewpoint of sovereignty out into cyberspace. And so we're going to talk a little bit this morning about what that means and what that means to you and the threats that you might see as a result of that. Next slide, please. So China's got a number of things that they're doing right off the bat, where number one is they're requiring companies that operate in China to honor their censorship requirements inside the country. And all of these things, by the way, are if you do not do them, you will not operate in China. The second is they are requiring new controls over the types of data that foreign business can collect inside the environment. Number three, there will be no cybersecurity tools used inside the country by anyone that hasn't had them approved by the Chinese government. I think that this is primarily aimed at their internal population, but it could also affect businesses going into the country. Required reporting, the government is requiring any reporting on any cyber events, and also any cyber threat intelligence in their possession must be turned over to the government. And then last, the government has been actually going out and hacking and DDoSing web services that appear to go against government sovereignty processes. Next, please. From an economic perspective, this is the latest issue that's associated with, well, I believe, the trade wars. But there's precedent in this to show that a few years back, Samsung was the #1 seller of cellular telephones in China. Today, they have less than 1% of the market. Just before Christmas, as a retaliation for the trade wars, the Chinese government stated that no one was able to sell anything less than iPhone X in the country. And anyone caught with anything other than an iPhone X would not be allowed to be promoted. And so we're seeing Chinese exert their economic muscle in retaliation for the trade wars, competitive forces, and also the Made in China strategy going forward. A couple of comments that came from some of the websites were, I've had my Huawei phone for over 5 years, it's never locked up. And one of the things that we think is happening is there may be a push to use WeChat, an organic type of a payment chat social media app inside the country rather than external, because they have the ability to monitor and census that application. Next slide, please. So just the vigorous defense, a couple of points to note is that, according to Foreign Affairs, Chinese spends approximately 20% of the world's R&D funds on an annual basis, about $230 billion per year. As well, China graduates more science and engineers than anyone else in the country. Even when I was over there roughly 10 years ago, at the time, it was said that they graduated 1 million computer science and engineers per year. So many that they didn't have jobs for all of them. And so these guys are really looking to become the cyber superpower in the next 5 to 7 to 10 years. They've taken on the space race. You've seen that in the news. Their plan is to build colonization there. Surveillance technologies, especially facial recognition, to be able to control the internal population. major telecom advancements in the One Belt, One Road initiatives, and then anything that poses a risk to Chinese national politics, territory, military, economic, culture, society, sovereignty, anything that associates with that is going to be at risk. Next slide, please. Some of the technologies and the R&D that we're seeing occurring, and I put this in just so that you know, if you're in one of these businesses, the MO by China has been investment typically means figuring out how to spy on other nations and steal their stuff. We saw it happen over and over and over with the F-35 and a lot of the other military technologies. We've seen it happen in the space-based laser space, the precision machining. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that ZTE, one of the companies banned from operating in the US, is almost completely beholden to the US for the manufacture of chips that they need in their telephones. So let me say that again. The Chinese spend a ton of money buying chips for ZTE telephones. So one of the things that the government has done is they've committed a $150 billion budget to improve China's ability to manufacture those technologies on their own, the semiconductors, integrated circuits, and chips. What does that mean? That means that if you've got a semiconductor company today, especially if you're one of the 37 that China has tried to acquire in the US in the last few years unsuccessfully, you will be targeted for cyber espionage and traditional espionage. Absolutely a given. Artificial intelligence. China has been very clear about the fact that they want to be the player in artificial intelligence going forward. $150 billion budgeted to go after artificial intelligence types of technologies. Quantum computing and satellite technologies, they've invested another $1 billion. They actually had their first satellite launched not long ago, and quantum computing, there's not been a quantum computer built to date, but China is pushing this because it increases their ability not only to have computing power, but also to dominate the space. And then the last, and this is only a sampling of technologies, but the last is One Belt, One Road. So if you look at the map that was published in the Silkworm Report, it shows one road running from Spain to Beijing. And along that road is a telecommunication network that's built out of fiber, and this is going to mimic the way that they orchestrated Africa and many of the stand countries. Long term, they've got $4 trillion allocated to this effort. Next, please. So what's the cyber so what in this? So you know the technologies because I've just told you some of the technologies that they're going after. If you're involved in one of these companies that builds one of these technologies, this is what I think. This is Stutzman's opinion based on a number of things that we look at. But number one is I believe that we're going to see Chinese hackers hide in plain sight. Why? Because they don't have to go after anybody using extraordinary means unless you're a savvy defense contractor that's been dealing with Chinese espionage over the last 10 to 15 years. Typically, they're going to be targeting the smaller companies who really have little or no current cybersecurity today. Botnets account for almost 80% of the criminal activity that WAPAC Labs identifies on a weekly basis, and it's proven effective against many of these smaller companies. And so when I look at this, botnet endpoints, roughly 80%, sinkhole C2s, roughly, well, I think it was 1% was left over, and then keyloggers were after that. So this is what I think. We're going to see attacks in plain sight using the botnets. We've seen them in other places, and both from a ransomware and an economic espionage perspective. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example of some of the things that we've been doing, Red Sky Alliance members receive blacklists from us, from WAPAC Labs, These are the unique addresses that we saw for APT activities in the last 7 days. 132 unique addresses were used 334 times in the last 7 days. We also had, I can't see it because my screen is cut off, but over 600,000 new botnet addresses in the last 7 days. So if you want to pull down these indicator lists, these are no false positives, high confidence, observed activity, the botnet endpoints classified by what they are, the sinkhole activities classified by what they are, high confidence. Red Sky Alliance paid members can log in through their two-factor authentication, and I've included the link in this, or they can take the blacklist CSV out of Slack. We make the blacklists available in CSV, Fortinet, and Proofpoint formats, and they have been very successful. So I would encourage active paid Red Sky Alliance members to go ahead and pull these down on a regular basis. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that were trending, I've been paying attention to this over the weekend. Not much cyber. I pulled the top hashtags worldwide, and yesterday, of course, it was football. Almost all day, it was the Baltimore Ravens and Joe Flacco. This morning, it was the Golden Globes and Bohemian Rhapsody and Lady Gaga. And in Brazil, you can see what's there. And Saudi Arabia, now I should have asked Mo ahead of time to translate this, but when I did it in Google, it was about feelings and emotions. Yesterday, when I looked at what was trending in Russia, it was Iran, #1, all day long, for whatever reason. And then this morning when I was updating, Iran was in the bottom part of the top 10. Putin had come up to 3, but was it the Golden Girls, I think, are #1. And so they actually are beating out Putin for the number of tweets. Next slide, please. From open source, this is taken from Recorded Futures daily emailer. I like to use this for just tipping and queuing. It's a good common sense secondary, kind of correlation point for me. But the Dark Overlord, we're going to talk about in just a second. Hezbollah, Shadow Brokers, we've written about a number of times. Chaos Computer Club is a 30-year-old group that we actually had talked about not long ago. APT 28, of course, we follow this all the time. As of this morning, NotPetya and WannaCry, as well as the Ryuk ransomware, have moved to the top of the list with Recorded Futures. This list was taken yesterday, but so that is suggesting to me that we may have a leading indicator of new NotPetya. Ryuk has already happened, Ryuk rather, and potentially WannaCry activities. We should be tracking for uplifts and trends on those. And if you don't have things in place to be able to protect yourself from NotPetya, Ryuk, and WannaCry, you probably want to give us or someone else a call. Next slide, please. Dark Overlord claimed to release the 9/11 papers last week. We have confirmation from 2 independent analysts, one with WAPAC Labs, one is a visiting analyst, that this is a fake. So the papers were things that have been released in the past, and the Dark Overlord, they actually had telephone calls with him. The Dark Overlord refused to show them any new data. It is believed that there is no new data, and he's taking advantage of his current social media status to attempt an extortion against the U.S. government and law firms. That said, there were a number of law firms that were mentioned in this. There were a lot of other things. I did look through the documents, and those companies that are mentioned, there is going to be some kind of a response from the government as to why documents would leak, even if they were 2-3 years old. The question is, how did they actually get out there? Who violated attorney-client privilege, if any? Who leaked the data? There are no unintentional leaks in Washington, D.C., and so I wouldn't be surprised that when the government gets back up and running, if we saw DOJ opening some inquiries as to how these documents actually were pushed out into the public. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, but we update blacklists on a weekly basis. And so for free and registered Red Sky Alliance members in the new portal, you're going to receive Terraline products, basically the top 10. If you are a paid Red Sky Alliance member, you have complete access and typically API access. If you're a trusted internet MSSP member and you're using a Fortinet or Proofpoint, we just do it for you. Those are the 3 levels that you can get your blacklists and make sure you're up to date. We have others that we publish as well. Next slide, please. Okay, any questions from the non-WAPAC folks? Thank you very much.